Hello, I'm Rabia Chaudhry. I invite you to join me every Tuesday for new episodes of Nighty Night Bedtime Stories to Keep You Awake, now on Podcast One. This new incarnation of Nighty Night is an anthology of stories that bring to life classic horror stories, some you're definitely familiar with, and others you'll be hearing for the first time. Join me as I tuck you into bed with stories that will leave you sleepless all night long. Get new episodes of Nighty Night every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey guys, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance. Then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Karen Reed trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my blithe co-host, Alice.
Brett, thanks for that. I don't know what to say because I don't know what that means.
I always feel like blithe should mean something bad. It sounds like a word that's bad, but it actually means like carefree and free-spirited and all that
You
stuff.
taught me a word of the day because I just only know that as a name. But it's more like Blythe. That was a very 90s
Honestly,
name.
maybe that's how you pronounce it. Blythe. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I've ever used that word in a sentence until this very moment.
So glad that our entire lives have pointed us to this direction, to become lawyers, to become podcasters, so that you could use that word in a sentence. And I'm sure that's what everyone here is here to listen about, not about the Karen Reed trial that seems to go on forever and ever. Now, Brett, I don't think people quite understand when we say that basically every moment we're not working our full-time jobs, trying to be present parents, and preparing for recordings, we are listening to testimony in this trial.
Yes.
It is all consuming. This really is kind of reminiscent of our Murdaugh trial days where there's just not enough hours in a day. But I do love doing this because there are so many talking heads out there who give their take on what's happening in the trial. And every time they say something, I'm like, that's not what happened at all. And so they always say, be the change you wish to see in the world.
So you're going to watch it yourself. And I got to say this, an advantage we have over people who've watched this live and even the jury is being able to just churn through witness after witness. I think it actually helps you to remember and understand the evidence better because, when you hear someone and they don't even finish their direct, and then it's the weekend, and then they come back. I mean, it's so hard to maintain continuity if you're the jury.
And that's a really good point because we always say, as you put on your witnesses, you're thinking about the storytelling. And when we get to kind of fly through these witnesses because we're watching it retroactively, not in real time, there really is a story, right? Usually, for example, husband and wife are right after each other. So you get to see where they confirm the other story, even though they're not in the same room as each other. So they don't know that they are saying the same things or confirming each other's stories. But it is very interesting to hear the same set of events from multiple angles. And you get to do that when you don't have to wait a weekend, for example. So if you have the opportunity to kind of watch it in that way, I think it does help you absorb better what the story is and what the testimony is and how it builds into one larger picture.
And I'll say this, the defense has benefited from the direct several witnesses ending on a day and that day ending, and then their cross doesn't start until the next day. And that is a huge advantage because then you can basically spend hours strategizing on exactly how you're going to attack a witness. That's a big advantage. And you've seen that on several witnesses where they've had that. So we're to Michael Lank, who is another officer in this case. We're going to talk about him. But before we do, we left you last time saying that a challenge to see the fewest number of conspirators you could come up with to make this work. Someone has already emailed us 3. It's a stretch to say they had a pretty good argument for how their 3 would work, but given all the testimony, I don't actually think it works. But I have decided we are going to take up the same challenge, Alice. We are going to do the Canton conspiracy countdown. We're going to talk about, of the witnesses as we go through them, are they part of the conspiracy? Are they conspiracy adjacent? Or are they just, that's how we're going to look at it. And I'm going to try and be as charitable as possible to the conspiracy. So not make the conspiracy too big, with the caveat that the defense present pretty much everybody is part of the conspiracy, but we're going to try and keep it minimal. So on conspirators, of the people we've gone through so far, this is my list, Alice, and I'll be interested to hear what you think. So far, the only person I have as a conspirator is Katie McLaughlin. You may remember Katie McLaughlin. She is a firefighter who knows some of the Alberts, and the defense has posited that she is lying about Karen Reed saying, I hit him, in reference to John. And that's sort of her part of the conspiracy, is that. So she is in my estimation, conspiracy adjacent. And this is where I feel like I'm being charitable to the conspiracy. I have Officer Sarah Timothy Nettle, Anthony Flamati, and Greg Woodbury as conspiracy adjacent. Now, all of those people say that they heard Karen say, I hit him, or some variation on that. I think Officer Sheriff says, it's like, I hit him, this is all my fault, or something. So my charitable interpretation of this is that they have been influenced by Katie McLaughlin and maybe the coverage since the accident. And so they now remember hearing her say that, but they're not like part of the conspiracy. They're not intentionally misleading as part of the theory. So that's my charitable interpretation. And then I have the incompetents, Paul Gallagher and Sean Good, who are the 2 officers we talked about last time with the snowblower and that sort of thing. So far, I don't have any of the officers as part of the conspiracy. I've got Katie McLaughlin. What do you think, Alice? Is that too narrow?
I think that's very charitable. I think based on the testimony and the cross-examination that's happening, again, we're saying this from the point of view that I don't think there's a conspiracy so far, but the way the cross-examination is going, they are pushing all of your conspiracy adjacent folks into the have to be conspirators camp, which I think is a even higher bar for the defense to have to build. So I think you're being very charitable to them, but I don't think they're being that easy on themselves. So they're not building a case that is easy to prove. And I would even go, obviously we know that they think the incompetence, it's hard. They argue them as incompetence, but they also argue them as part of the conspiracy. But I'll be charitable on that. I will say we'll give them incompetence because it has to be kind of an either or, even though they do not argue it as an either or. But I will be charitable and say, fine, it's an either or. Let's call them incompetent, even though I think the snowblower is actually pretty smart.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the way the defense is presenting it, probably a lot of these people are conspirators, which I think is not a great thing. But like I said, I'm trying to be charitable. I want to narrow it down as much as possible. And we'll sort of, maybe we can do that as we go, differentiating between what the defense is saying and what we're saying.
And then something to keep in mind as you think of this, why is Katie McLaughlin, for example, if she's the one conspirator so far, why? What does she have against Karen Reed? What does she have against John O'Keefe? Because that to me is the question that is very, very large and looming, that is not as easy to put into a category as the categories we're drawing here?
Well, she did go to a baby shower, one of the Alberts, and she was on her 30-person track team. So I know I've been to a lot of baby showers, and every single person there and every single person I went to high school with, I would definitely frame someone for murder to help them. And let us not forget, she is Facebook friends with one of the Alberts. So
did anybody else go to their Facebook friend list and defriend a bunch of people?
You better.
after that.
and how just the stars aligned that she just so happened to be on duty that morning, right when the Alberts, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. So she's my first conspirator. Now, Michael Lank. So let's go to Michael Lank. So Michael Lank is one of the officers who is going to be an important part of this case. He is someone who interviewed a lot of witnesses. And as you'll see happen sometimes, this sort of starts outside the presence of the jury because we're trying to establish this friendship. The judge at the beginning of this case made sort of a split the baby ruling on third-party liability. We talked about this on legal briefs. Some other dude did it defense. That is a defense in this case. And the defense wanted to make sort of a full-throated argument about this. The judge made this sort of half and half decision, which doesn't seem to have actually limited the defense much. But you see sort of this kind of thing where we have to establish outside the presence of the jury, are they really friends? And the judge decides whether or not that can come in front of the jury, and it almost always does. So we talk about Officer Lank, his relationship with the Alberts. He has been friends since childhood with Chris Albert, who is Brian Albert's brother. And Lank was asked about a fight in 2002 with a man who had also been in an altercation with Chris Albert. Lank said the fight was unrelated to Albert. The defense is obviously trying to say this was just another example of Lank involving himself in some sort of dispute with the Alberts and coming in on the side of the Alberts. He did it in 2002. He did it again in 2022 when it was time to cover up a murder, or at least he was biased. And so he maybe didn't look as hard as he should have at the Alberts. And the judge is going to allow the defense to get into this event from 22 years ago to some limited extent. So then they bring the jury in and we start to talk to this officer. So with the jury present, Lank testifies about the day of the event. He speaks about how the state police became involved and how once it became clear that John would not, he immediately brought them into the case because that's a requirement. The state police investigate all suspicious deaths. At this point, the state police said they could not respond at that time. The defense objected as to hearsay when Lank was asked why. Presumably, that might come out later. I'm going to go with it was because of the blizzard. State police were probably a little bit underwater at that point. Lank spoke to Jennifer McCabe, and he told her that he would need to speak to the homeowners, Brian Albert and his wife. She said, they're probably sleeping, but later Lank saw there was a light on side, and so he was able to enter the house. And at that point, he did speak to Brian and Nicole Albert. Lank said that he knew Brian as the eldest of the Albert brothers. He had grown up in Canton and coached youth sports, and he was good friends with Chris Albert. He said he was civil with Brian, but he didn't really consider him a friend. He said Albert was disheveled, and he appeared to have just woken up. The house seemed in order. No one tried to prevent him from entering or appeared to be acting unusually or seemed to be nervous or anything like that. In fact, Lank was inside the house a total of 3 times that day. Lank said that he only saw the front foyer area of the house. He did not go into the basement or really anywhere else in the house. The basement becomes important in this case. The defense has posited to that location as where John O'Keefe was actually killed, beaten up, attacked. We'll go with attacked. He was attacked in the basement and from the basement taken into the front yard. So the basement's going to come up again and again. Now, he agreed with Officer Gallagher that there was no probable cause to search the house. The defense would dig into this and would ask Lank if he locked down or secured the premises or removed people from the house. Now, how he would do this without probable cause is not entirely clear. He was also asked about taking people's cell phones, which once again, this is not East Germany. I'm not really sure how you would do that. And let's just talk about probable cause for a second, because I feel like this is confusing to people for obvious reasons, but just think of it this way. You guys have probably all followed the Delphi case. In the Delphi case, there was a search warrant. There have been a lot of what are called Frank's motions that were filed saying that the police left out critical information that they should have included that would actually defeat probable cause in that case, and that they shaded the truth to make probable cause stronger. This is a really interesting moment, I thought, because defense attorneys are really good at talking about the Constitution and their role in defending the Constitution. We all know defense attorneys are absolutely critical for the justice system to work. Every person is entitled to a defense attorney. They play a fundamental role in the constitutional system. They've sort of expanded that in recent years. I feel like their PR has gotten better. And now they're like not only the defender of the justice system and ensuring that defendants get counsel, but they also protect your rights, your Fourth Amendment rights and your Fifth Amendment rights. They're standing in the breach against police overreach. But then you see a case like this and you remember defense attorneys, their job and their oath and their duty is to their client. And if violating your rights helps their client, that is what they're going to argue for. So they're arguing for searching someone's house based really on nothing more than there was a dead guy outside who knew the people in the house. And just imagine how the writing of this affidavit would go down. Imagine you got Officer Lank and you got the DA and they're talking about this. And the DA is like, okay, what do we got? What we got? What are our arguments? And they're like, well, he knew him. Okay, that's good. That's good. He'd seen him earlier that night. Oh, that's good too. That's great. And he was found in front of the yard. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We're getting there. What else do we have? Well, his girlfriend says she hit him.
And let me ask you, do we have any witnesses who say they saw him in the house? Maybe. Because maybe that brings him into the house. Okay. That's not good.
But they're all lying. I mean, there's 11 of them.
Do you have any indication that all 11 are lying or any one of them are lying?
Absolutely, because why wouldn't they be lying? They don't want to be involved in this.
Okay, but I can't put that in an affidavit because the judge is going to ask me to sign my name to it and swear to where I got that information. So can you point me to anything that indicates you suspect, based on your experience, why these people would be lying?
Well, most of them are family members, and family members lie for each other. Now, there were a couple random girls who just knew one of the people who were also there. But friends lie for each other, too.
Do you have any indication that these family members ever lied for each other to cover anything up?
Sure, we could dig something up.
Okay, related to John O'Keefe. No. Related to Karen Reed. Okay.
They all seem like they were pretty friendly with John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, which I guess we have to put in there.
Did anyone see them fight? Any people in the house fight with John O'Keefe?
No, but two of them were like play fighting in a bar earlier that night. So they could have been planning their attack.
Okay, so you say play fighting, so there was no aggression and no police were called about an altercation earlier in the night.
Well, no, but
okay. Well, I'm just gonna like put on my judge hat for a second. You said something that really is not sitting right with me right now. You said something about his girlfriend saying she hit him. Does that girlfriend live in that house?
She does not. In fact, she was never in the house. She said she was never in the house.
She was never in the house. Did she park her car in the house?
She parked her car out front. That should count for something, right? Briefly.
Okay, but she never went in the house. Do you have any indication that we're talking about, veracity of her story? Anything to back up that maybe she did hit him?
Well, her tail light was broken. And we did find tail light pieces in the snow underneath the victim.
Okay, was there a trail of taillights from the house front door or basement door all the way to the body? Maybe he was dragged there.
No, they were all where we found it.
Okay, harder.
There was a glass,
harder.
though. There was a broken cocktail glass.
Okay, the glass belonged in the house. The glass belonged in the house. There's a whole set in the house so we can match it to other glasses in the house.
No, it came from the bar that they were at before. But still, that's something, right? I mean,
there's nothing here. I don't know what to tell you except what we can't get probable cause for?
He was found in their yard.
What about the neighbor's house? What about all the other cars that were there? What about the bar? I mean, he was at the bar at least.
Surely we can seize their cell phones, download it, and look at everything they've ever done based on this, right?
Okay,
surely we have that.
So, yeah, I'm sure we can get a warrant for that. Like, everything they've ever done, all of their dick pics for sure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
All of those things, every time that they, texted lovers and all those things, because he was not a lover to any of them, right?
No, he was not.
I don't, so,
But we do have messages from her telling him to go F himself. So there's that.
I see where we're going, and I'm feeling really good about this. We totally have probable cause for her phone and her car. Can we do that?
I mean, I guess. If that's the best alternative we have, if that's the only search warrant I can get, then I guess I'll take it. But anyway, so that is the kind of conversation that you would have had.
I know that was a little bit in jest, but we literally have these conversations with our investigators when we are drafting these warrants. And these are questions, like we were really trying to get to yes. And we have to put on our judge hat because we will get smeared across the courtroom by the judge if we were to bring everything we had there, and that was it, to try and get a warrant to violate someone's constitutional rights to their phones, to that what the Supreme Court has called essentially an extension of yourself, right? This is not just a phone. It's an extension of who you are, your very essence as a human being, and your house, your castle, one of the preeminent examples of what you have privacy within. And here we are saying the reason there is a bar is to protect your constitutional rights. And when you break down those barriers willy-nilly, there is no longer protection in any circumstance. That's why this is important, because justice is supposed to be blind. And we have to apply those same standards here, because I've heard so much in the media. They should have just gotten a search warrant. Not that easy. And thank goodness not that easy. That's the entire point of these protections.
Let me give you, well, number one, I think the one argument that you should disregard out of hand is, well, maybe they could have found a judge who would sign it. That is not the point. And even if there was a judge who would sign it, number one, that judge is not doing their job. And number two, the prosecutors, as we have said before, our job, we actually do take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And our job is to think about these things. We are a gatekeeper. So even if you could find a judge to do it, you should not submit that. And I will tell you, the judges that I work with would never sign off on a search warrant in this case based on what we have, both exculpatory evidence, the various things about Karen Reed, and the fact that there's not a ton of connection between the house and him. I mean, the only connection really is he knew the people, he'd been with them earlier, and he was found on the front yard. That is not a bad place to start at all. And if you had a couple more things, maybe you could get there, but you couldn't get there with what you have. And the cell phones are even harder, because then you got to show some connection between the cell phone, which maybe you could do. I mean, you would get their phone records and see that they called each other and texted each other, which they did. And so maybe you would use that, but you just need more. And let me say this, if these same defense attorneys represented any of the people in that house, they would be screaming to high heaven that this is a fundamental violation of their rights. If you were able, it's just not something that you can imagine a defense attorney letting slide.
Let's play this out a little bit. Officer Lank actually did the right thing by saying, I should go talk to people in the house because of all the things we laid out at the very beginning. Great place to start for your investigation. He actually does. He even walks in. He talks to them. When you're doing these kind of knock and talks, you use your observation skills. If he in fact saw that the house was in utter disarray, that the two occupants of the house seemed like they'd been up all night, maybe with gloves on and Clorox, seems a little bit strange to be cleaning your house, when it's still dark outside, when you just had a party and you look pretty disheveled. Looks like you never went to sleep. In fact, you're still wearing the clothes from the night before. You still have the stamp from the bar, whatever. And all of a sudden you see shards of glass, on the corner that seem to match some of the glass you saw outside. And there seems to be a trail of blood, and they continue to kind of put themselves in front of you so you can't see within their foyer. Okay, we're getting somewhere. These are all things that police are observing when they do these types of investigations so that they can put these things within their affidavit. You don't have to have, I saw the murder weapon, that's why we get to search there. You can say things from, based on my experience in investigating X number of years of homicides or suspicious deaths, I have noted that the way he talked, the way they tried to block my entrance, even though they had all the constitutional right to block me, but the way they were acting indicated they were trying to prevent me from seeing certain things. And I also noticed broken glass that seemed to match what the deceased had near him at the time. Those sorts of things, you're beginning to build your case for a probable cause. And that's why sometimes we see these warrants come not the same day, maybe not even the next day, but maybe several days or even weeks after an investigation has been going on, because the police are collecting evidence so they have evidence that amounts to probable cause to bring to the court. I remember when I first got access to the internet, It was terrifying. I would go into these chat roulette rooms not knowing what I was doing as a teenager. And I didn't grow up with internet the way today's kids have. I can only imagine what it's like for them. Who knows what they're seeing on social media, what music or videos they're looking up. It's unnerving to think of everything they can do on their phones now. Statistics show that 45% of teens say social media makes them feel sad or depressed, which is why I want to tell you about this lifesaver for both parents and children, Gab. Gab is the leader in safe smartphones and watches for kids, teens, and tweens. With no social media apps, no internet browser, and GPS tracking, Gab devices were built from the ground up specifically for kids and teens and are the way to keep your kids safely connected. And Gab phones and watches are still tech kids actually want. There's unlimited talk and text, a clean music streaming app, and over 100 third-party apps that can be installed at parents' discretion. Other safe device options or parental controls let you know what's already been accessed. But Gab's phones and watches are built with smart filtration that proactively blocks harmful content before it reaches your kid. I love this product. You guys know we cover stories about the dangers of social media, catfishing, entrapment. It is terrifying out there, but with something like Gab, I know I can rest easy at night while still being able to stay connected with my kids. That's why I think Gab is a game changer, and I can't recommend enough that you give them a try. This is the absolute best time to check them out because right now, Gab is offering $25 off any device to new customers with no contract required. That's $25 off any Gab smartphone or smartwatch. Just go to gab.com/prosecutors. That's where you'll get the best deal. That's Gab, GABB.com/prosecutors. Gab.com/prosecutors. This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Huggies knows that babies come in all shapes and sizes, and their tushies do too. Huggies Little Movers with its curved and stretchy fit. Moms know that there's nothing worse than an ill-fitting diaper, especially for your active babies. I love Huggies because I can rely on them to keep my baby covered while she moves around. You guys have heard about my sweet little baby. She just turned 1, deep into mobility. I am so excited about Huggies Little Movers because she can roll around, jump around, climb, which is everything she's doing. And I know that she is covered, and so am I in the cleanup.
And we all want the very best for our babies, and that's Huggies. Huggies Little Movers are curved, so babies feel comfy no matter how much they're moving around. And they're moving around a lot. They also offer up to 12-hour protection against leaks, which is a game changer. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. And let me just say one more thing about the separating the people, because this comes up a lot. Why are people separated? Obviously, you as an officer can ask to interview people separately. You can say, hey, do you mind if I interview you over here? But what you can't do is just decide, you know what, I think these 11 people might be involved in a crime, so I'm basically going to arrest them and move them somewhere and place them somewhere until I decide what to do with them. An example of this, you guys all remember the Robert Wan case. Those 3 guys lived in the apartment where Robert Wan was found stabbed to death. When they went to talk to the police, they would at times take breaks and go outside and sit in a car together and do who knows what. And the police couldn't stop them from doing that because they weren't under arrest. They were there voluntarily to talk to them. So the defense is always trying to present this as like the fact that they didn't quarantine every member of the Albert family until they had gotten statements from them or whatnot is a failure of the police. There's nothing they can do to prevent those people in that house from being in the house together at that time, unless there is a situation where they have probable cause to do things like arrest people and search houses and that sort of thing.
And we will move on from this, but a good judge, if they got the affidavit written with the facts that were just in this case, would go through that colloquy we just went through. That wasn't completely in jest. You would have to actually answer those questions with the judge. Except I, as the questioner, was much nicer than any judge would ever be to you. I have had search warrants denied by judges. It is not a good feeling. Times when I thought I had well beyond probable cause, and the judge raked me over the coals over the evidence that was presented. So that
judges tell you,
really happens.
Don't even come over here. Don't even, like, yeah. I've looked at this. You're nowhere near close. I don't even want to see you. Go back to the drawing board. I mean, that happens.
Absolutely. So. Okay, so still on Lenk. So Lenk also talked about working with Kevin Albert, who was another Albert, and he was a Canton detective. And Lenk, he's not trying to live under a rock here, and he's not trying to minimize the fact that, yeah, there could be perceived bias between the Albert family and Canton police because of kind of the close ties and the family members who are part of the Canton Police Department. And Lenk says because of this perceived bias, and no, perceived bias doesn't mean there's actual bias. It's just saying from the outside, could you see someone question whether there is bias? And when there's perceived bias, oftentimes we take measures to mitigate or to recuse, even if there's not any evidence of actual bias. So he's like, yeah, because there's perceived bias here, this is actually what led to Canton being recused from this investigation. Lenk argued that it was not a problem that he and other officers did not separate the witnesses at the McCabe house. Kind of like Brett was saying earlier, the Robert Wong questioning is a great corollary example. No one was under arrest. There was no reason to be able to hold them under arrest and to control them. Right? There's no reason this police officer can say, you can't talk to your wife or husband or brother at that moment in time. If they found out more information, they could have. But at the time, no. And they didn't find out anything that warranted them to be under arrest or to be separated either. And Lenk further testified he did interview people, but he did not record conversations, which is not unusual at all. Lenk says this. Other police officers say this. We've said this, not particularly in this case, but in any case. Not every single interview is recorded. Actually, the vast majority of your interviews are not going to be recorded because you don't always have a recording on you, because you have your note taking, because oftentimes you're interviewing a broad swath of people who you will re-interview if they are going to be trial witnesses later. Because at the investigative stage, you're trying to understand the state of the situation to understand where your next leads are going to be. So the fact that every interview isn't recorded is actually incredibly commonplace, not just for Canton, but for any law enforcement. And he goes on to testify that he interviewed Brian and Nicole Albert together. Remember, he knocked on their door and they seemed to have just woken up and they were together because they live in the house together. And they also were interviewed with Jennifer McCabe. After he spoke to the people in the home, he consulted with Gallagher about how to handle the scene in the midst of this blizzard that's still going on. We've already heard testimony how unusual this scene is, right? They had put crime scene tape up, but it was completely worthless because of this wind that was ripping through. And so to kind of try and mark off this crime scene space, they actually surrounded where the tape was with marked patrol cars, which you see them do this on the highway, for example. If there are so many cars going by and there's a big accident, police cars will actually block off parts of the road in place of police tape because it's more effective. And that's what they did here. So they took measures when the environment around them wasn't allowing the usual course of business for marking off a crime scene location. Now, remember last time we talked about the use of the leaf blower to try and clear layers of snow to look for evidence. Well, Lenk actually was one of the officers who watched this leaf blower being used, and he was the one who recovered the broken cocktail glass that was found underneath it. Lenk was given the evidence box with the glass in it, which he removed for the jury. So you bring evidence to trial, and you seal it, you do all the, markings to make sure there's the correct chain of custody. And he's actually the witness who is the one who takes out this broken cocktail glass to show to the jury so they have the actual glass that the police found in front of them. And the cocktail glass appeared to be probably something like a lowball glass or a whiskey tumbler.
Let me just say this. I kept hearing cocktail glass and imagine sort of a martini glass is sort of what I was thinking of. But it's not. It's a cocktail glass. Like you would have a Negroni or a Manhattan, or if you're a bourbon drinker, you might have a bourbon in a lowball glass. I'll say this. One thing that's interesting about the glass. There's going to be video we see later where John is said to have this glass in his hand. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But It's interesting that he had that glass because all the testimony that we're going to see whenever we get to it is he was drinking beer. So if he switched to that, which is usually, a stronger drink, definitely, than a beer, I guess maybe it was the last thing he ordered at the bar. Now, Karen was drinking highballs. So she was drinking a vodka tonic. They usually come in taller glasses. It's a bigger drink. It's sort of lower alcohol content altogether because it's the same amount of alcohol, but it's mixed with 8 ounces of tonic or whatever. And she had a lot of them, but that's what she was drinking. So this glass would probably not be one of her glasses. It would be either something that John had and brought with him from the bar, or if you believe in the conspiracy, then actually it did come from the home somehow, and maybe this is part of the frame job. They dropped the glass there to make it seem like he never made it inside. He still had a drink from the bar. Now, that is a pretty sophisticated part of the frame. I mean, usually people forget the little things in frame jobs. I mean, that is a cherry on top of the frame pie if they did that, because that was thinking through. And they found that glass very early on. So even before, for instance, your state troopers would have been involved, that we're going to hear a lot about, they'd already found this glass. So explaining the glass away actually is a pretty important part of the conspiracy theory. And I don't know if the defense would say Lank is a conspirator when we get down to our list, and that's why he was there when this glass was found.
Well, there's more, especially if you're thinking about whether Lank has to be part of this conspiracy. So what we've talked about so far, what he's testified to is the morning that John O'Keefe is found and his investigation, immediately following it, basically. Fast forward about a week. On February 4th, Lank got a call from Gallagher that Chief Berkowitz had discovered more evidence. In the interim, remember, we had been in the middle of a nor'easter, a blizzard. But since then, the temperature had risen to the mid-40s. Those of you who know science, that means above freezing, meaning snow has the opportunity to melt. And in fact, it did, and it had even rained. So because the snow had melted some, it revealed more stuff, which is why several days later, they found more evidence. On the ground, Berkowitz spotted a piece of red glass, and Lank was sent to photograph it and where it sat before they collected it as evidence. They then secured this item in an evidence bag, and the piece of red plastic or glass had been lying in the snow, so when they took a picture of it, you can see it looks very visible. It's hard to miss at that point. Could have been hard to miss during a blizzard because there was snow piled on top of it, but once some snow had melted, you can kind of see how it becomes exposed. So the defense zeroed in on a comment that Lank made when he called into dispatch, saying that he was responding to 34 Fairview and that there was a Boston police officer down and that he wasn't sure if there was a fight or whatever. And it's that fight or whatever that they completely seize on. And they ask Lank in 20 different ways. So you knew it was a violent event. You knew there was a fight. What made you decide it was a fight? And Lank doesn't give in to any of those characterizations. He says, no, he just knew that they had an officer down and that the victim, John, had trauma to the head and he didn't know what was going on. It could have been, he said, multiple things. And he described it to indicate basically it wasn't like a heart attack or something like that. And he didn't try to minimize what he said, but he also didn't put too much import because it was at the very beginning before they'd done any investigation. And he's calling something in. You try to give as much information as possible so that the appropriate help can be sent. And help was sent. He was taken to the hospital. They tried to revive him. Ultimately, they failed. Now, Lank was the one who recovered the blood in those solo cups, and then he put them in a refrigerator, possibly in the evidence bag, possibly not. I think this was a little bit murky. And the defense makes a big deal about them being in a Stop and Shop bag. Stop and Shop is a grocery store, so basically like a paper grocery bag. I used to shop at Stop and Shop. Whew, that's a tongue twister.
Oh, me too. I love Stop and Shop.
Those are some good days. I still have my reward card on my keychain, actually.
I had that for forever.
It's 10 years old. I haven't used it in 15 years, and I still have it. I don't know why. There's no Stop and Shops near me. So again, there's a lot of improving on the spot in this unusual circumstance, right? This is exactly the same kind of paper bag the police use for evidence bags. Like they're usually these paper bags, and you just fold them over. So I'm not sure they make hay of it. The defense certainly makes hay of it. But Lank is just doing the best he can, again, in those circumstances.
Yeah, and I mean, the defense is going to make a lot of hay out of the sloppy investigation, the fact that they just weren't ready for this, and it looks like they weren't, and so they improvised. But as I've said before, I would think that to the extent you compromised any evidence, you introduced foreign DNA, anything like that, it actually would help Karen, because it would introduce other individuals and other possibilities into the case. But obviously the defense is going for the incompetence angle. Alice, what do you think? Okay, one thing about the drink, I know a lot of you are wondering about the glass. Could it have come from inside? It was consistent with the glass from the bar. There's also going to be testimony later on about the little black cocktail straw that they are going to find as well, which would go along with the glass. More evidence that this is a glass that came from the bar, not from inside. But Alice, what do you think? Officer Lank, is he in the conspiracy, or is he conspiracy adjacent, or is he just incompetent?
So I'm going to be the less charitable one, since you've taken the high road of being the charitable one. Because he handles so much evidence, I think the defense needs him to be part of the conspiracy, because he has the glass, he finds the red taillight, he's the one who actually talks to the Alberts in the first place. And so potentially adjacent, but I think for the defense, because he touches on so many important things at the beginning, he needs to have at least gotten the back call that you better be doing things to be mitigating any fingers being pointed at the Alberts. So I'm going to put him in the conspiracy camp.
And I think you're right. And I think the defense would definitely put him in the conspiracy camp. This whole notion that he's been in a fight before for one of the Alberts, you know, the idea that he is biased. He is the one who finds the glass. I think the defense would agree with you. I think they would say he is in the conspiracy camp. So we'll put him in the conspiracy camp for now. Okay, so then Officer Charles Ray testifies. He doesn't have a whole lot to say. The most important thing about him is he pulled his car in behind Reed's vehicle at around 8:25 a.m. the day of John's death. And his dashboard camera catches the back of her car, and you can tell that her tail light is damaged from that camera. Now, he didn't notice it, and there's snow sort of obscuring part of it as well, so it's not necessarily something you would notice, but it's right there in front of you. Prosecution really struggles with how to get this in, how to get him to talk about it. The defense objects a lot, wins a lot of their objections. The jury sees it, but this is kind of a fail, I felt like, on the prosecution. They did not do a good job of exploiting this. This video will come back later, but it shows at least by 8:25 the vehicle is damaged, so the defense is going to have an explanation for this, and you can just decide for yourself whether or not that holds. So
yeah, I felt like that was a little bit of a lost opportunity, because you're right. I mean, Lieutenant Ray didn't have much to say, and that's okay, but the dash cam says way more. So I guess you have him on to say, this is my dash cam, and then I would have spent all my time bringing out the fact to have the jury look at the dash cam themselves.
Yeah, and the farther back you can push the damage to the taillight, the better, because obviously, if the taillight is damaged earlier, then you have to believe, once again, a fortuitous event that assists the conspiracy, because she accidentally damages her taillight. Just so happens to be the day that they're going to find John dead in the snow, and she's going to think she hit him, and there's going to be evidence that she hit him, which presumably was planted by the police, according to the defense. But that is only really possible because the taillight's already damaged. I mean, obviously, there's a world in which the police just smash the taillight and do it, but they don't have to do that because she had damaged the taillight on her own. So that's going to keep coming back when it was damaged for the first time. Okay, Michael Camarano. So we've left the investigation behind for now. We're going to come back to it, obviously, but now we're going to back up a little bit. We've done the finding of the body in the immediate aftermath. Now we're going to back up and talk about the night before. So Michael Camarano is a friend of John's. Their kids had both just gotten into the same Catholic high school, and they wanted to celebrate. He'd seen John and Karen a few times, actually a couple times a week, so he was pretty familiar with both of them. He went to McCarthy's that night. They were drinking Bud Light, which he confirmed. We have video of this. We have him and John drinking Bud Light. Then we see Karen come in. She's drinking a clear liquid out of a glass with a straw. Karen typically drank vodka tonics, which is consistent with this glass. That night, he said everything was normal. They were affectionate with each other. They were friendly. this is an example. The prosecution is calling witnesses who are going to set the scene, who say plenty of really good things for Karen, who set it up as if that night, whatever we're going to learn about their overall relationship, that night, at least at that point, everybody was friendly, everybody was happy, they seemed happy together. Now, in the sort of pure Massachusetts moment, Mike had to leave the bar after his kid got hit in the head with a hockey stick and lost a tooth, which is just, I love Massachusetts so much. So he had to leave, and he would learn later that morning that John didn't come home that night. He actually drove over to John's house to see if he could figure out what was up. He was surprised to see the garage door left open, which wasn't like John. Reed's SUV was pulled into the garage. Mike actually tried to clear out the snow and close the garage door because he knew how angry John would get when he got home and saw that, which is, one of those moments where he just doesn't realize what's going on. Mike would eventually take John's daughter home to be with his daughter because they were friends and he wanted her to be with somebody while this whole search was going on.
Yeah, this is where the storytelling comes in, right? There was the very technical people who don't know anything about John. We started with the first witnesses who humanized John, and now we're going back to that. And I'll say I got, very drawn in as Camerano was testifying, because you see he's testifying to everything that's happening right before he finds out that John is dead. And you see how everything is cut off in the midst, right? They were just together drinking. They were just celebrating their daughters getting into a great school. And he was clearing out the garage, right? It's not like John is some angry person that his garage would be open. I'd be angry if my garage was open because it's getting filled with snow during this blizzard. All of this, you feel the import of a life cut short. I thought this was effective storytelling because we'd been on so many technical witnesses up to this point. How much do you think you're paying in subscriptions every month? The answer is probably more than you think. Over 74% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. I definitely did. I completely forgot I had about 5 different streaming services that I never logged into. Thanks to Rocket Money, I'm no longer wasting money on the ones I forgot about. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I can see all my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with just a few taps. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. They'll deal with customer service for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscription by going to rocketmoney.com/prosecutors. That's rocketmoney.com/prosecutors. rocketmoney.com/prosecutors.
So then we have Catherine Camerano, who is Michael's wife. She's going to talk about how good a man John was and how much he loved her kids. The morning of John's death, Karen, who called a ton of people, called her between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. screaming for Mike. She told Karen over and over to calm down and to hang up, but she wouldn't do it. So she hung up on her. She called her husband, but he didn't answer. She called Reed back, and Jen McCabe, who was one of her daughter's basketball coaches, was now there. Her understanding was that Jen, Carrie Roberts, and Reed were going to go look for John. She'd actually known Carrie Roberts since high school. At 6:34, Karen texted Catherine, "He's dead." 2 minutes later, she texted that John was found in the snow.
She reads a lot of these text messages going back and forth, and it is really heartbreaking because she's saying things like, I'm sure he's, as we all do, right? Calming down a friend, his brothers, or on a friend's couch. And when she gets the text that he's dead, she doesn't believe it. She texts back, "Are you serious?" So next on the stand is Kurt Roberts. Remember, Carrie Roberts was with Jen McCabe and Karen Reed to go search for John in those early hours before John was found. Kurt is the husband of Carrie Roberts, and he was drinking at C.F. McCarthy's with John and Michael Camerano the night before. The men drank Bud Lights, and he also testified that Karen had a vodka tonic, which was her drink of choice. He also testified that everyone seemed to be normal. There were no heightened emotions or anything like that. Nothing stood out in his mind, even in hindsight, as being out of the ordinary. Now, the next morning, his wife gets up very early and starts putting on clothes, and he asks her, "What's up?" Now, Carrie tells Kurt that Karen has called and John is missing. Kurt testified again that he didn't detect any tension between Karen or John, and he didn't think that either of them were drunk when he left the bar, although Kurt also says he was in bed by midnight, and we know that both Karen and John stayed out not much longer than midnight. The next witness is Rebecca Trayers. So Rebecca didn't personally know the people involved here. Rather, she was the bartender at the Waterfall, which is a bar, and it closes around 1 a.m. with last call at 12:45. John, Brian Albert and his wife, and ATF agent Brian Higgins were all at the Waterfall drinking when Rebecca was also there bartending. Rebecca testified that John left a $10 tip on a $16 tab, and she testified that when everyone left, it didn't appear that anyone was drunk.
Which I find her testimony to be interesting, because when I hear other people say that people aren't drunk, I'm always like, well, that's because you were drunk. And if there's one thing that makes you think other people aren't drunk, it's when you've been drinking. It's always amazing. Like at CrimeCon this year, I didn't drink as much because I'm getting older. I'm trying to be more responsible. So I just didn't drink as much. And I was reminded at how much everybody else was drinking because it was much more evident to me. Whereas if I'd had more to drink, I would have thought, no, everybody was fine. But she's the bartender and she's speaking about this. And I thought that was interesting, even though everybody had a lot to drink, and they will testify to the fact they had a lot to drink, but they weren't overly intoxicated, it seems like.
Right. And notice here, I think this actually goes to the prosecution not trying to twist facts that are not in their favor in particular. The fact that basically all of these witnesses are saying the same thing. No tension. They know Karen and John know their kind of usual rhythms, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. So if they're trying to build up a story that this was a crime of passion or they were fighting that night and that's why she on purpose rammed into him to kill him, the facts aren't there, and they're not hiding from them either. And this is realistic, right? The defense, you can build a story, but the prosecution, you have the facts that you have. You have to build the best story you have out of it. But when I get these kind of counterfacts that don't exactly help the prosecution story, it tends to make me think I'm getting more of the full story from the prosecution. Now, they don't have to put on everyone up there, but they've had several witnesses back to back say kind of the same thing. No one seemed drunk. Everyone was having a good time, seemed to be in good spirits, no heightened emotions.
And, it's interesting because it's a double-edged sword for the prosecution and for the defense. If this were purely a DUI homicide, then Karen being really drunk would be a valuable fact. But because it's also second-degree murder, her not being that drunk actually helps the prosecution when they get to intent. That it wasn't just she was so drunk she didn't even know what happened. Yeah, she'd had some drinks, and maybe that affected her. But everybody said she wasn't that drunk. And so when this happened, if it happened, she knew exactly what she was doing. So we'll see how this goes by the time we get to the end.
And remember, one other thing to keep in mind, these things are all very complex. We do have her blood alcohol level. She was, in fact, drunk. Well, kind of. This will be debated later, too. But these are all different things that we have to pull upon in terms of trying to determine her state of mind. State of mind is a whole other game. But we'll get there. Okay.
Good luck with this one, Alice.
I'm sorry. I'm going to butcher his name, and it's because I listened to it on mega speed when I was listening to testimony. But Nicholas Kolakithis is the next witness on the stand. He went to the bar with the McCabes after a high school basketball game, and he ended up with the O'Keefes and the Alberts at the Waterfall bar. By O'Keefes, I mean Karen and John. And they're all at the Waterfall bar. Remember, we heard from the bartender right before this, and everyone was drinking and generally in a good mood, he said. And they discuss whether going to another bar or going back to the Alberts' home was the next step. Everyone's having a good time. They didn't want the party to end. He testified that Karen wanted to go to the Alberts, but Nicholas himself said that he and his wife didn't really want to go. Eventually, they all went to the Alberts' home, but Nicholas and his wife didn't stay for the after party. They actually went home, and he again testified that everyone seemed happy. There was kind of no tension among the Alberts or Karen or John.
These people are really interesting because they're almost throwaway witnesses, but if you think about it for a second, you realize how kind of important they are. There's two things that stick out to me about them. Number one, they must be so happy that they just went home. Because if they hadn't gone home, if they had gone to the Alberts, they would be part of the conspiracy. And who knows what their lives would have been like for the last 2 years. But as it is, they're relatively minor participants. That's the first thing. The second thing, the defense, for reasons that are unclear to me, and some of you have fought me on this, and that's fine that you have your own theory about what happened. The defense's theory is this was premeditated to some extent. This attack was planned. That's what the defense thinks. They're going to tell you that Higgins and Albert were practicing for the fight in the bar. They're going to tell you that the dog and Colin Albert were waiting in the basement. They're going to tell you that this was all driven by some prior something about the grass. They're going to tell you that Jennifer McCabe was trying to separate John and Karen and get John alone. That's the story they're going to sell. At the same time, they're apparently doing this. They're just inviting everybody in the world back to this party. This is the weirdest premeditated attack ever. Because what if Nicholas and Karen had gone back and been like, whoa, what are y'all doing? Why are y'all beating up our friend and throwing him in the snow? Like, they wouldn't have known how that was going to go down. But you got to believe that this just sort of ad hoc group of people who all got randomly invited to come back to this house, where there were people already there who you didn't even necessarily know who they were, how long they were going to stay, could have been part of this conspiracy, but for the fact that they decided just to go home. And it's a weird quirk. If you go with it wasn't planned, it was random, just something happened, it went wrong, and they had to cover it up, that works a lot better. But for some reason, the defense is really invested in this. This was a planned attack from the get-go. And I don't know if it's because it had to be planned for the rest of the conspiracy to come together. You'd had to have put a little effort into making sure the conspiracy was going to work out overall or what. But to me, it's a stretch.
That's a really good point. Like how uncontrolled your premeditated attack would be if you have all these people coming over, some leaving, some not going. Are they leaving because they're chickening out? Were they part of the premeditated conspiracy and now they're chickening out? Now you have people who are liabilities because they can testify against the premeditated conspiracy, but they have no blood on their hands, quite literally. I mean, think this through in terms of what the conspiracy would have to be. Because if I had Kalakithas as part of my conspiracy, they knew what was going to happen, and I knew that they also drove away once they got to the house, I'm sweating over here. Because I'm like, well, there are a couple witnesses who can testify against us, who know about our plan, but who have, whatever reason, have cold feet now. Or, flip side, they had no idea and they were just going to end up and be part of like what was happening in the house. More witnesses to kind of create chaos and more witnesses to be witness to what's about to happen. Neither are good for the defense's whole story.
So then we have Karen Kalakithas. She's Nicholas's wife, and she confirms basically what he said. Jen McCabe tried to get her and Nicholas to come to the house, which, once again, Jen McCabe, key conspirator here. I mean, I don't care how vast or narrow your conspiracy is. Jen McCabe, she's trying to get more people to come over to the house to be witnesses to what's about to happen, apparently. So she is inviting them to come over, but Karen was having none of it. She wanted to go home. She said that at the same time, while this is not great for the defense's overall conspiracy theory, she's also saying that Reed was singing John's praises, talking about how wonderful he was, and her only complaint was that they weren't able to spend as much time together alone as she would like, because obviously John had the kids that he was taking care of. So these are the randos. I think we can all agree, and I think everyone would agree, they are neither part of the conspiracy, nor are they conspiracy adjacent, nor are they the incompetents. They're just people who were there.
But one thing to note about all this, there are a lot of witnesses to this, right? This is whatever happened, whether you think Karen redid it or this was some police hit conspiracy. This was not done it was done in the dark of night, but this was done in the midst of a lot of people being able to see a lot of things. They were at a public bar. They were all coming back to a party at a house. And that's something to keep in mind. We have a lot of different viewpoints to try and understand what's happening this night.
Then we have Chris Albert, who testifies. Chris Albert, who is going to be on the conspiracy list, he would have to be a key part of this conspiracy. I will say, now we're getting into watch these people testify. A lot of people we've talked about, if you don't want to watch them, don't watch them. But now we're getting to the alternative suspects, the murderers, or the people who conspired to murder, or the people who were accessories to murder. Chris Albert would be one of them. Now, he is Brian Albert's brother. He owns a pizza shop in town, and John would bring his nephew to the shop a couple days each week to grab a slice. In fact, they'd swung by the afternoon when everything went wrong. Chris was friends with John, at least according to him, and he texted him that night about going out, telling him to get over to the bar or he'd F up his lawn. This is the defense. I don't know. Look, the defense has done a great job at times with various witnesses, but there are things that I just do not understand, and this is one of them. This is obviously a joke, but the defense, by the time they get to Cross and Chris, it's like, this is very serious. Like, this is a threat. He threatened him. He was going to F up his lawn unless John came out. It's like John was filled with fear for his lawn, and so he had to go out with him. I mean, that's how they present it.
And guys, you have to know a little bit more, and it does come out, because a lot of you are saying, F up his what? He didn't say, I'm going to F up your face, or I'm going to F you up. He's talking about his lawn, like the green space in front of your house, right? That's not a usual threat, and you're right. That's not a usual threat. It is a specific thing to John that's an inside joke.
Well, John loved his lawn, apparently. He took very good care of it. He was a grass man. That's what he was. So he was a big fan, and the defense will later present this as some sort of threat or something showing hostility between the two, though it's pretty clear that this was a running joke with Chris and his wife and John. The defense, and once again, just will later present a picture. They will introduce a picture into evidence of Chris Albert and his wife standing on John's lawn and like laughing. And the picture that they then sent to John, which was obviously part of a joke. But it's pretty clear this is a running joke. So the defense are going to enter this photo. Their claim, they zoom in on the photo. Like, are you giving him a thumbs up while you're standing on his yard? And Chris and his wife joked about this. Chris actually in her phone had John listed as Nebercracker, which I had never heard of, but I learned from the defense's cross-examination, is a character from a children's movie who hated people walking on his front lawn. So
clearly a joke.
It's clearly a joke. And this is such a serious thing to posit this as somehow being the genesis of a feud that's going to lead to John's death. Is just, and the fact of the matter is, the reason they took that photo is because they were taking care of, like, John was out and they were doing something at his house, picking up the mail or something. They took this opportunity to do this photo and send it to him. So in any event,
look, a lot of times we know the defense is just trying to poke a bunch of holes and create enough holes in a story to create reasonable doubt. But it's calls like these that really cheapens their entire conspiracy, right? Like, if I'm in the jury, I'm like laughing under my breath because I'm like, this is so clearly a joke. If you actually have so much evidence of this like premeditated, terrible conspiracy to kill a friend, someone they clearly loved at some point in life, that they like took care of their lawn or yard and had an ongoing joke with, then you wouldn't be putting in something like this, because you just wanted this in there because he said F up something. That's why, you probably did a control F and wanted to look for like profanities, because we do that all the time. I do searches for profane words to try and get to the hottest documents all the time. But if this is the hottest thing you have, I as the jury am thinking, really sounds like you're grasping for straws here. So I thought it was a misstep to enter something like this.
Conspiracies happen. The conspiracy, it's kind of like salt. A little bit of conspiracy goes a long way. And you need, in a case like this, you're the defense, you want to have a little bit of conspiracy to spice up your story, to make it work. But you want to keep the conspiracy narrow. You don't want to never go full conspiracy. And they're going full conspiracy, just all the way. And when you do that, it makes it silly at some point. At some point, it just becomes, this is not it, guys. You may have some good points. Maybe you can prove that he was bitten by a dog. Maybe you can prove that Chris Albert's son is a bully who just didn't like anybody, would fight at the drop of the hat. Maybe you can prove all that. But the lawn thing, Like, once again, what is the point of the lawn? To show some sort of premeditation, to show this was a plan, to show that this was a long-running feud. And I feel like that's a mistake. I think something happened at the house and they had to cover it up is such a better conspiracy theory than this was all part of getting him there. And they threatened his lawn to get him to come to the bar. But he did come to the bar. He came from C.F. McCarthy's over to Waterfalls. Chris and his brother were drinking with Brian Higgins, who is the ATF agent who we've mentioned before. So John and Karen show up. Karen, in a humorous moment for everybody, was actually hiding a glass from the last bar in her jacket, and I will go ahead and guarantee that was not water. She did not steal a glass of water from the last bar. Clearly, the clear liquid that it was in it was alcohol of some sort. Chris thought this was funny. He made a comment about it. Everybody was having a good time. Everybody seemed normal. He talked to Karen. She really wanted to go and get pizza at his place. This was something she really wanted to do. She wanted to go get pizza to celebrate the kids getting into good schools. Chris had sort of a tradition that when they would celebrate, they would do that. Friends would go over to the pizza shop. They'd close it down. They'd cook some pizzas. They'd hang out. They'd eat. They'd drink beers. I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. And she wanted to do that. But Chris and Brian were actually in the midst of a weight loss challenge. And the weighing date was coming up. And Chris was afraid of blowing it. So he's drinking Miller Lite. I guess that's fine. But he didn't want to eat any pizza because he was afraid that he might lose the weight loss challenge. Because of that, and this is apparently something they did every year to raise money for charity. At some point, he buys a round of Fireball shots for the group as things are wrapping up. That's bad news, guys. Whenever the Fireball shots come out, it's time to go home. But he was doing that. He then actually walked home around midnight. He said by the time he got home, he was freezing and he went straight to bed. About 10 minutes after he got home, his son Colin came home. This is going to be important because Colin is one of the people who has been posited as John's killer. So Colin had been over at the Alberts' house that night celebrating Brian Jr.'s birthday. Colin saw Chris and told him, "Good night, guys. I love you. I'm home," which was sort of the thing he would do when he came home around his midnight curfew. The next day, Chris woke up around 8:30 that morning to the shocking news that John had been found and had died. He said he was in shock. He would eventually go over to his brother's house around 9:30. He said he found Brian and his wife along with Jen McCabe. They were sitting around the kitchen table, obviously also in shock. Now on cross, as we said, the defense, they're going to dig into this grass thing, but they're also going to talk a lot about Chris and the Alberts connections in town. They talk about his deep roots, the fact that he had just been elected as selectman. Now, he was not elected till after John's death, but nevertheless shows sort of he's well liked in the community. He's connected in the community. He's arguably powerful in the community. They noted that Brian had actually moved after John's death. Chris would say they discussed Brian selling his home before the death. Brian would confirm this later, that they had already hired a realtor. Though I just got to tell you, if somebody dies in my front yard, I might want to just move. They don't really see that as some big thing. And as a matter of fact, just point of fact, if you commit a crime and your home's the crime scene, don't move. Because guess what happens when you move?
Other people can get in it.
Expectation of privacy. Exactly. You no longer have an expectation of privacy. Anybody can just walk in there now. They don't have to worry about it. So
you know who's going to show up to that open house? The police.
Yeah. And you know who would know that? A guy who was a cop. But nevertheless, they sell the house after John's death and they move somewhere else. So they talk about the Alberts, chief of police. They talk about their connections to Officer Lank, to Michael Proctor. He's going to be the lead investigator. The defense is really going to hammer on this relationship with Proctor because Proctor's he's a weak link for the prosecution, as we'll eventually get to. Now, they also tried to downplay this relationship with John, noting that, they had never really exchanged phone numbers until sometime shortly before John's death. And the defense does the whole, I'm going to be a jerk to the witness and hope he gets angry thing, which you see, which is a strategy in which this defense team is really good at. They are really good at being the jerks who are trying to get somebody mad. Chris really never gets angry. He's cool as a cucumber, despite the fact that his son is going to be someone they're going to accuse of murder, which I thought was interesting, but he just sort of goes through it. The defense notes that Chris said he was home by 12:10, but there was evidence he didn't leave the bar until 12:13. This is a relatively insignificant discrepancy, but it might play some role in exactly when Colin returns home. One of the defense theories, as I said, is that Colin got into a fight with John at the Albert house, killed him, and then went home. The walk from the waterfall to the Albert's house is maybe 10 minutes. There was an argument about whether it was more or less than 7 minutes. So it's likely that either way, assuming Chris is telling the truth about walking home at all, which I guess is up in the air, he got home sometime around 12:20, 12:30, which would put Colin walking in the door at around the time John and Karen would have gotten to Brian Albert's home. So you can argue about times all you want. If Chris is telling the truth about seeing his son didn't do it. Obviously, Chris is a conspirator in the defense's theory, and they're going to say you can't believe anything he has to say.
How much do you think you're paying in subscriptions every month? The answer is probably more than you think. Over 74% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. I definitely did. I completely forgot I had about 5 different streaming services that I never logged into. Thanks to Rocket Money, I'm no longer wasting money on the ones I forgot about. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I can see all my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with just a few taps. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. They'll deal with customer service for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscription by going to rocketmoney.com/prosecutors. That's rocketmoney.com/prosecutors. rocketmoney.com/prosecutors. That was a lot. All right, with that, so, you're really beginning to see Chris is right there, right? He sees John, essentially right before John dies. And to kind of back up or to further explain what Chris has just said, the prosecution calls Julie Albert, Chris's wife, to the stand. And she testified that they lived just 2 houses down from John. They were neighbors and they were friendly. Julie pretty much confirms everything that Chris just testified about. She said that she left the bar early because she had a migraine that night. And when she got home, her youngest son was at home while Colin had not gotten back yet. This timeline seems to all coincide very well with what Chris has said. Her oldest son is in the Navy and was away, so wasn't home at all. And she said her husband arrived home sometime around 12:10 and pretty much got straight into bed. Colin, she said, arrived home 10 or 15 minutes after her husband got home. Again, pretty consistent with what Chris just testified about. She said Colin came upstairs and said goodnight, as he normally does when he gets home, and went to bed. Julie then said she woke up around 8 a.m. and she saw that she had a missed call from Jennifer McCabe. She thought nothing of it, and instead she went to get donuts for her nephew, Brian Jr.'s birthday, as was her tradition. When she arrived to the Albert home, she went in the door and to her surprise, everyone was sitting and looking visibly upset. She didn't know, she hadn't gotten word about anything being out of the ordinary, so she asked what was wrong, and they told her that something had happened to John. She asked if John was okay, and they said they didn't know. She testified that no one at the Albert home had visible injuries that she saw, including her son, Colin. And of course, that's important here because if one of them or all of them were part of a conspiracy to attack and then ultimately kill John, who is a 16-year veteran cop, it would not be unreasonable to think that they would have self-defense wounds or some wounds from John fighting for his life.
And, just These are some cold-blooded killers, if you think they're all involved in this. Her going to get donuts, going to Dunkies to get the donuts that day, to just keep playing the part of, oh no, this is just a normal day. I'm just taking donuts to my nephew, as I do every year. Just, if they're really all involved in this, it's just, man. And that's the thing, like you see these people testifying if you watch their testimony, and you got like the pizza shop owner, and you got like, this person's a librarian, and this person's a cop, and this person works in the AG's office. And it's just, they all feel like this is just normal family. It's the salt of the earth. But under the defense's theory, they are just like the Manson family. I mean, they have got this just cold-blooded scheme to kill John. And I think, once again, if they could narrow that conspiracy down a little bit, it would be a little bit more believable than what they're presenting so far.
So she goes on to testify that a few days later, police came to take her statement about that night. And the person to take her statement was none other than Proctor, who was one of those troopers. He was the brother of one of her close friends, Courtney Proctor. The defense focuses on phone conversations between Courtney and Julie in the days after the death and leading up to Karen Reed's arrest. So this is their attempt to basically show how close she is with the Proctors and how, I guess, the statement that Proctor took of hers couldn't be trusted. So the defense argued vociferously over whether or not Julie's description of her conversations as, quote, rarely with Courtney was correct. They're trying to show how close Courtney and Julie are, and Julie's like, yeah, I rarely text her. Julie said she didn't recall specific conversations with Courtney, and the defense also notes that there are calls with Trooper Proctor on his personal cell phone. Now, on redirect, Julie said the 6 phone calls that she exchanged with Proctor over that period were less than she'd typically have with close friends. She's just a very prolific caller, apparently. So she's like, yeah, 67 is the number, but I actually call my friends way more than that. So 67 is not a lot for me. She also spoke to Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, as we've said, on his personal phone, but she did not recall the details of that conversation. Julie confirmed for the defense that she never saw fights or tension between John and Karen. And she also said that they seemed to be perfectly fine at the bar that night and that Karen didn't seem intoxicated. Julie testified that the police searched her phone but returned it to her rather than keeping it. So really quick about Julie. If she is part of this conspiracy, or she's covering for her son, who part of the conspiracy to attack, you would think she would want to say things that help the prosecution's theory. You would think she'd say, yeah, Karen was lit up that night. She had so many vodka tonics. She was drunk out of her mind. She was driving all over the place and it was super irresponsible. Or I saw them, John and Karen, fighting, and boy, were things heated. I just wanted to get out of there, because then that would support Karen being the perpetrator. But instead, she's saying things that are not great for that story. She's saying, nope, Karen didn't seem intoxicated. They didn't seem like they were fighting. Everything seemed good. So it's interesting because if she is part of the conspiracy, or conspiracy adjacent, or wanting to cover for her husband or son after the fact, you would think that her testimony would actually be more in the prosecution camp than it actually is.
And look, you can say, well, everybody makes mistakes. They didn't think about that. They didn't think about that part. But once again, this is a conspiracy where they thought about planting the broken cocktail glass and the drink straw. You would think the very first thing they would say is, we should tell everybody that her and John were fighting. You would think that would be the first thing you'd think about, especially since John and Karen did fight, and everybody knew that, and we're going to hear testimony about that later. You'd think they'd say, well, they looked friendly, but Karen took me aside and said, I've really been fighting with John a lot. Or John, he said, hey, I'm trying to put on a good face, but man, I'm so ready to leave her. It'd be so easy to say something like that, and no one could disprove it because John's dead and Karen's the defendant. They don't do that. And repeatedly, you're going to see these folks who are supposed to be the masterminds of this conspiracy give evidence that is not helpful to the prosecution when it would be so easy. Like, you think she's lying about whether or not 67 phone calls is a lot or not. You think people are lying about whether or not they're friends, close friends, acquaintances. You think they're lying about that. But they're not lying about whether or not John and Karen were happy that night. That would seem to be something you'd lie about, but they don't. And that is sort of maybe they're just It's like that scene in The Princess Bride where the guy with the iocane powder, and he's like, you put it in my glass to keep it as far away from you, but you know that I would think you'd put it in your glass to put it far away from me, so you put it in your glass. But you would know, a clever man would know you'd put it in your glass to confuse me, so it's in my glass or whatever. Like, it's like that. Their conspiracy, they have to be so, they're thinking so far ahead of the rest of us that they know actually will bolster the conspiracy to say that they were perfectly happy that night, because then no one will think that we're involved. Maybe.
And here's a comment. I know that defense kind of harp on the fact that she's so close to the Proctors that she speaks to Michael Proctor on his personal cell. Here's just a reality, unfortunately, because remember what I said earlier about the Supreme Court noting that your cell phones are an extension of your very self. When you work, you have a work phone and you have a personal phone, probably, you know, if you live in this day and age. Many of us, not just law enforcement, have a work phone and a personal phone. And oftentimes they get mixed, right? Like, I've definitely called Brett before and we're talking about something else because we're friends and have each other's personal phone numbers, that when we were both at the prosecutor's office, I'd be like, oh, by the way, did so-and-so ever bring you the case file? I'm not going to hang up and pick up my other phone. It's just the way, because your investigation is your life, right? And because of that, by the way, most governments have evolved now, recognizing that it's almost impossible to keep people's personal phones from being in the workplace, because most people don't have a lockbox unless you work in a skiff where no phones are allowed, where you can't bring in any of your personal devices, because that's how we live and that's how we communicate with our schools and our kids and our doctors and all those things, that they just say, okay, well, if you communicate with your personal phone, that's just part of discovery now. So like, if you have text messages on your personal phone, that's just part of discovery. So it's not like there's a hard no-no for using your personal phone. It's not best practices. It absolutely happens. And what you do is that if you create records on your personal device, that is part of discovery, which should make you not want to use your personal phone. But again, that in and of itself is not, like, first of all, unheard of, nor does it automatically show anything untoward.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's not like his government phone is recording the calls. Like, whether he called her on his government phone or his personal phone, it's still going to show up. And you're still not going to know what they say. My government phone, the number has basically been sold to every telemarketer in the world. So it's worthless. So I don't use it for anything. I use my personal phone for basically everything. And I'll say every agent who I've got in my phone, I've got their work cell phone and I got their personal cell phone. So I get why the defense is saying it, because it's like, ooh, you're being shady. Like, it'd be one thing, sending emails to your personal email is a little bit shadier, because then you're sort of feels like you're dodging the record collection thing. But the cell phone thing, to me, doesn't feel that significant. Though, once again, it's just, she knew his personal phone. She felt comfortable calling him on his personal phone. That shows how close they were. It speaks to the connections, which are real and are a fact. Everybody is very connected in this case. Everybody knows everybody. It's weird to have this small a town, like 15 miles from Boston, right? But that's the way it is. Well, I feel like we got through a lot today. We're about to get into, even more people. We added 2 people to the conspiracy list. I think you have to add both Julie and Chris to the conspiracy theory, at least as posited by the defense. I'm willing to accept that Chris and Julie are not part of the conspiracy if you think the defense is off base. But at least what they're presenting, we're going to have to put them in the conspiracy box for now. And we're going to just keep talking about folks who are either completely innocent bystanders who lost a close friend and are still devastated by that, or are his killers and conspirators and accessories after the fact, because basically everyone who was at that party, we're going to talk about over probably in the next episode, maybe a little bit longer, but I think we'll get through everybody who was there that night. And then we're going to pull back again. So this is sort of an interesting way they've done this. They start with the crime. They step back a day to the night before. And then we're going to go all the way back to Aruba. We're going to talk about what happened there. Then eventually we're going to start getting into the boring stuff, which is actually pretty interesting in this case. The forensics, the telematics, the cell phone data, all of that. Eventually we'll get to Trooper Proctor, who is sort of the barn burner witness who's going to have so much bad. I mean, honestly, y'all can say, if you want to, that these defense attorneys are great. Maybe they are. if Karen Reed is acquitted, it will not be because of the conspiracy theory, in my mind. It will be because of Trooper Proctor. It'll be because of what Proctor did, and jurors who just say to themselves, if that guy's involved in this case, I can't trust anything about this case. I'm not going to convict. That's my thought. So, spoiler alert, when we get to him, it's going to be important. That'll probably be 7 or 8 episodes from now. So, just be ready.
I thought you were going to say he's going to take 7 to 8 episodes. And I was like, yeah, sounds about right.
He may. He may. Yeah, this is a long one. I admit that. We're going to figure that out later on. I don't want this to take the rest of the year.
We'll make you guys t-shirts that say you survived.
Yeah. Eventually, this case is going to end, at which point we'll probably start doing at least 2 episodes a week. But for now, we're walking through this with you. And who knows? It may never end. It may go on forever. It may be like the Young Thug trial, where the prosecutor today apparently said, going to need another half a year or more to put on their case. And the judge was like, well, then we're starting to do trial on Saturdays and Sundays. That case, we're not doing that case because I don't know what's going on in it, but it's just, I'm not going to watch a year of trial. I'm just not going to do it. If y'all want to talk about it, we'll talk about it on a legal briefs or something in 30 minutes, but we're not doing the whole case. Okay, Alice, we haven't done many questions. Do you want to do a question real fast? I know we've gone long, but let's do a question. We're only recording like 5 times this week. So.
I know.
This is an interesting question. This is from Jersey Boys Girl Toaster, which I don't know what that means. Somebody have to send me an email to explain that. So Jersey Boys Girl Toaster wants to know, if you were the prosecutors for Casey Anthony, what would you have done to increase the possibility of a conviction, if even on a lesser charge? So that's a great question. I don't know that there was anything you could do. You could have not gone for first-degree murder. You know, maybe if you just didn't even charge that and you just charged some sort of negligent homicide, really focused on how she just wasn't present, it wasn't there, made up the babysitter, like all that sort of stuff, maybe you could have got there. But that's a tough one to second guess.
The outcome was just tough in that whole thing. I don't know that I could have done anything better. You had a really difficult defendant, you had really difficult witnesses, and her ever-changing story. So it was a tough case. Okay, one more. You know, it's funny how many people ask us about work-life balance. You can tell that's something that's really on people's minds. Maybe because we complain too much about it?
Maybe. Okay. This is from MG6784. You're obviously an Alabama fan. Roll Tide. Who is your most hated rival, and why is it Tennessee? Well, the reason it's Tennessee is because unlike other teams we play who like to put on airs, Tennessee actually is a great team with a great tradition, with a lot of success in the SEC. So, you know, it's so much more meaningful when we beat them, whereas when we beat other teams, it's just like, I'm glad I don't have to listen to those people for a year. So that's why it's Tennessee. What do you think, Alice? What are your thoughts on that?
I just like to egg on Brett because, like, he's come so far in his, like, evolution of an SEC fan, or a Bama fan, really, that he used to tell me he would fall into, like, deep bouts of depression when Bama would lose, and he doesn't fall into utter depression now. So I'm just proud of him, and as a result, I don't feel so bad about just ribbing him all the time about anyone that could get under his skin that's not Bama.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate that.
I also buy his kids Auburn themed clothes.
Go straight in the trash.
All the time.
Straight in the trash. Straight in the trash. Okay. So we know you guys have lots of thoughts on this. We've already heard from you a lot about those thoughts. Even though we've only released one episode publicly, you've already decided exactly what's going to happen, exactly what we're going to say. Which maybe you're right. Who knows? We'll see. But we want to hear more from you. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Follow us on YouTube. Watch these videos on YouTube. Join Patreon if you want these episodes early and ad-free, while people in the public have heard one Karen Reed episode. Patrons have listened to 4. So that's what you can get. We love seeing you guys, and thank you to all of you who join us to record all these episodes. Y'all are fantastic. We love every single one of you. Well, we're going to be doing this case for a while. You know what you're going to be talking about next week. More Karen Reed. We know you're excited. We're excited to cover it. All right. We'll be back then. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Oh, just by the way, this has been a week of fun. The AC did break, so it is hot in here if I start sweating. That's why.
Glistening. All right.
Excuse me.
You ready to start?
Oh, yeah. Heck
I need
yeah.
a word for you.
Don't I look ready?
You look so ready. You've never been more ready. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to see you all again. What should I call you today?
Awake. Very awake. You guys aren't even seeing like half the recordings we're doing this week.
Will I get in trouble if I call you hot? Is that like sexist?
You know what? We like making everyone lose their mind, so why not?
I mean, you are
because it literally is hot.
Right?
It's so hot in here. It's like 100 degrees outside.
It's summertime, and with Pluto TV's Summer of Cinema, the streaming is easy. Stream hundreds of free movies on all your favorite devices all summer long. Chill out poolside with Mission Impossible and Transformers. Or stay cool inside watching Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Titanic, or The Wolf of Wall Street. No matter your vibe, download the Pluto TV app to spend summer doing what you love. Watching endless movies. Tell me that's not the deal of the summer. Summer of Cinema on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.